Okay, today we're using the technology I wanted to use from day one, which is we're actually recording using my own computer. And we have a movie straight away, which is really good. You've got popcorn. All right, so I know that what I want to do today is actually use whatever we know today, whatever we have learned so far, to start designing reading activities. Okay, so it's going to be a wake-up call for us all, which means we have to be alert. It doesn't mean anything bad, it just means we have to be alert. So it's a wake-up call class where we have to open our eyes and all of that, and remember. So that's the first thing. But because I am an academic, I can't help myself. So there's always a little introduction. I shouldn't do it. Had I not gone to the Wednesday seminar that we had somewhere at the university, we hold them every week, or we have hundreds of seminars, I wouldn't have actually spoken about it. But here it is. A person had a research grant, and the context was remote schools in NT, where hardly anyone speaks English. You don't have to take notes or you can listen to this lecture when you're half asleep, just before you go to bed. I mean, I do it. What's wrong with you guys? No, I don't have a life, that's true. So, and the teachers had a problem because the kids didn't speak English. Mathematics, in their view, was a highly conceptual subject area where you actually have to have particular concepts, like you've got to know what's an angle, you've got to know what's a corner, you've got to know what's a circle, you've got to have particular phrases. And then the teachers also have learning outcomes. Didn't we talk about it last week? Our favorite learning outcomes. And they were obviously teaching to the learning outcomes. I didn't dare to ask how they were picking them. Like per year you have like 30, 40, how many? There's plenty of them, isn't it? Pages. I actually would like to know from you how you are told to pick your learning outcomes. Who tells you? What's the logic? You only have like 2 terms.
The guide by what's in the curriculum.
So the school curriculum picks it for you.
The Australian curriculum, yeah.
No, Australian curriculum has learning outcomes, but how do you pick them from the list?
What do you mean, in your class?
Yeah, like today what you will cover. How do you know?
Generally in the schools, the teachers sort of, all the year 6 teachers will get together and plan together.
That's
so
a problem. So what happened? The teachers had these problematic children. Not that they saw them as problematic, it's just that there was a problem, therefore they were problematic children. Then they had this problematic curriculum that was the same as for children who speak English, and they were to teach to these learning outcomes, and they couldn't teach these children because the children didn't speak English. Do you see any problem with that sort of reasoning? What do you think? What do you think? A person who has a PhD talks about it this way? How do you yourselves don't think that just because you're little with no PhD you know nothing? I've taught you enough to actually see where the problem was. So the children don't speak English, you've got mathematics, you've got to teach to the learning outcomes, you have a problem because you can't talk to people who are not with you on the same page. What do you do?
I don't know. What do you do?
What did we do last week? So I told you it's a wake-up call today. It's a week 9. I'm really bad at administrative stuff, right? But I'm fully aware it's a week 9 because students were submitting assignments and they told me it's week 8, Ania, it's this week, Ania. And I go, oh, okay, well, submit it. I have not got postgraduate students with you and you win. So what do you do? Well, the advice was you change the taxonomy of the learning outcomes to appropriate it for do? You make ESL students different. You tell them if they have a problem. You actually write it down. You legislate it. If you were that person, how do you feel? Comfortable? Thank God the children live in their own big world and they don't care. But really, that's what do you do? Come on, guys. This is now on film. Mind you, I can put it there.
That's not a bad idea.
That's not a bad idea. These are collaborative sessions. Nobody comes to collaborative sessions. Nobody wants them. I really like this way we teach because everything is plenty of materials out there. Okay, so what do? You run away. You leave your remote school and you go to Sydney. That's one option. But not always you can use it. What's the other option?
I suppose you have to make the learning relevant to them. Don't you? You have to pick something that's relevant.
Okay. What's very interesting that you said, and I'm going to pick on it.
Okay.
Because it was very interesting that the person who gave a paper kept talking about that teachers couldn't teach these kids. But you didn't say the word teach, you said the word learn. Now, one of the talents of a good intellectual, and teachers are intellectuals, I mean everybody is trying to remove that talent from you and make you into a reproducer of a particular procedure, right? And they do it everywhere in it. Nowadays someone sent me this direct instruction, just in case you don't know, because we're young, but I'm old. In 1930s, there was an elite school of French. They were teaching through direct instruction. So obviously we're digging out old stuff and destroying people now, hoping that nobody remembers. But the old ones are still there, like me or my ex-husband. So he was a professor of French, so you would know. Anyway, one sign of a good intellectual, which teachers are, and if you doubt it, just have a look at the history in the Ukraine when the Russians came in order to bring socialism. The first people that went and got killed were the teachers. In Cambodia, the same. That's what they have a problem. That's the problem they have now. They have no infrastructure. All the intellectual classes gone, wiped out. They didn't kill the farmers. They killed the people who could think. So one of the talents of a good intellectual is to actually remember what you said. Memory is a wonderful feature of intelligence and of thinking. And not only remember, to be consistent. We can't use the word teach and learn as if they were synonyms. There's a reason why we have two words for it. Even synonyms don't mean the same thing. So what you said was making learning relevant. But what the teachers were worrying is how they're going to teach those kids who don't speak English. They never rephrased their question into how are we going to assist them in learning mathematical concepts in the way that is relevant to them and we can bypass or work with the English we have. Or bypass language or work with the English we have. How can we do that? That's a completely different framing of the question. I'm going to teach, which means I've got this thing and I have to put it into your head. I have a problem. Your mind is not receiving English codes. How am I going to do it? But learning is a different thing. It's about expansion. It's not about reproduction of the behavior that the teacher values. When you want the children to reproduce the behavior that the teacher values, you're doing oppressive pedagogy. That's theoretically speaking. What I call it is a simplistic pedagogy. It's not even a pedagogy, it's just bad practice. So what do? how do they assist learning in those maths contexts? What should they do first? Now you are geniuses. We've covered this ourselves. This is the week 9. We could draw on everything we've been studying and thinking about really hard. I'm laughing because I've been an undergraduate student before, actually twice, in Poland and then in Australia. So I've done that twice. So what do? We've got those ESL kids. We have to teach them mathematics. We now know that we don't teach them, we assist learning, right? We support learning. So that's a much nicer way of reframing it. So what do?
Give them sort of tools so they can go and explore for themselves, so they can find meaning.
So we give them tools. That's really good. But tools would be we have to teach them those concepts. And then you're stuck. It's a rephrasing of it's a very political answer because it uses different words. But when I'm to look at it, what exactly in practice it means, if I give them tools, then I still am teaching them concepts for which they cannot comprehend in a sense, or they have a problem, or the teacher has a problem. So how do we give them those tools?
Work out what's relevant to them.
You see, the problem is we have an indigenous class, nobody speaks English or very little English or whatever, however, teachers would think that, when teachers can't do particular things, and the reasons why they can't do particular things very often is not because of language, but because of culture and assumptions they bring with them. They turn up in the class and all they have is their little heads. And how many times I said, this is not the way to do. You do not turn up what I call unprepared in class. If it is just you and your book, you're wrong. Just because 99% of the population of teachers does it, it doesn't make it right. 99% of people in America were thinking that slavery was a natural state of being. Didn't make it right. So how do we give them those tools? Please don't take notes. How do we give them those tools?
I give up. How do we give them tools?
Yeah, what will we be doing for the last 8 weeks? How do we give them the tools? Well, first of all, we come prepared. What do I call coming prepared? Could be many different ways.
You could, if it was a cultural thing, and I don't know whether this is the right answer or the answer you're looking for, I would maybe go and speak to some of the Aboriginal elders, if I was in an Aboriginal school, and maybe ask if some of the older people could come in and be in the class as well to
Yeah, I taught ELA201 or EAL201, and that was just a fabulous default answer I was getting from students who were absolutely not going through the unit and giving me a default answer. Just get a native speaker. What about if you have 12 students with 12 different languages? What do? You get 12 people in the class? Okay. The reason why I talk about technology is because it's giving you a methodology for not only solving this problem, but if you don't want to use technology, for solving the same problem in different ways. It's the methodology that counts, not the tool. And I do it with technology because technology is something that I'm good at and that there are reasons why I use it. It enables for a quick compare and contrast at the fingertips, as opposed to dragging children around, which is quite fine to go to the forest and do things. It's still quite all right. But some of them will not be so much with you. Whereas with technology, if you create enough opportunities for quick compare and contrast, for breaking down information as a result, then you are more likely to have them all on the same page. sooner. That doesn't mean that you cannot take them to the bush, that you cannot do all the other things. You can, but don't forget technology, because it actually enables children to make personal relationships, because they are doing the clicking, they are doing the connections. A lot of times people don't understand what I'm talking about because you've never seen the use of technology in this particular way. Usually technology means using games for the sake of doing the game, which is just totally, it's my mother could do it, as I always say. I have to think it a little bit differently. Okay, so if they had particular compare and contrast tools for children to solve problems, say about whatever they wanted to see as a relevant concept, but with the use of technology, then children now who are multisensory beings have more than just one way to access concepts. Really, truly, one thing I wanted to say, your math is not as important as you think. The idea that I have this knowledge and I'm going to impart it onto you because it's going to come out from my face into your face, it's ridiculous. It is 19th century thinking, and it probably wasn't, because the aristocracy wasn't learning this way. They were going overseas, they were trying things, they were doing apprenticeship with musicians, with writers or authors, and so on. Nobody was actually learning this way. It's just industrial era that has reduced everything to this kind of methodologies. Me and use. Right? And there are tools for doing this. You can create your own, you can use in an imaginative way stuff that is out there appropriated for this kind of exploration. And you can also use what's called, there's online this system, which is from year 1 to 5, mathematics without language. I forgot the website now, you can find it somewhere. And I've done myself those exercises, so it's amazing. Now how you use those exercises is up to you. That's where your head counts. How you use those tools with children to engage their history. The tools are there. How do you use it? That's where your brain comes in. So it's not the knowledge you have that counts of mathematics, but how you work with tools, with that knowledge. The key of pedagogy. All right. So we have to create 5 activities in reading. And you're gonna do that. You have an assignment to write in about a few weeks. How are you gonna start? You go, okay, so how are you gonna start? Goodness gracious me, not yet another bloody assignment. Yeah, we've done that, okay, so we're over that, swearing. Next. Hate Ania, can't do it the way we do it in school. Done that. Good. Number 3. So we've covered all these stress emotions. We're going now towards more creative way of thinking. So what do we do? You have an assignment to write, and what do you do? Well, come on. What do you do?
The resources, different resources.
So you are what? Collecting them or what? But how do you know what to collect? I mean, I have a website of resources for literacy, and it's just a never-ending thing.
Think about what year that you're teaching.
So you consider what year you'll be teaching.
You
Okay.
also need to consider the actual reading ability. So some people might have a lower reading ability, so you have to make sure what your plan is suitable for them as well.
So there are reading abilities of the group. So we know that they will be different, right? So what do? So if we have different reading abilities, how do we account for this differentiated learning?
By having one way you do it is having a range of activities which can assess from a low ability reader through to a higher level by having them tell you who's actually
Anyone else rephrase it? Did you hear what your friend said?
Yeah,
Kelly
yeah,
said?
I can't really rephrase that though. Can you say it again?
So one way is you have them tell you the characters, the plot, and all that. But is that a why reading activity?
Okay, so what you're saying is that we should have some assessment tools that enable us to differentiate between abilities in students, right? That's a common knowledge. Anyone else has a comment on it? This is the thinking time. Now remember, it's those children who are under 5 that are geniuses, not the ones at your age. And they were geniuses because they were shooting answers. So as soon as you have this frontal cortex of yours stopping you from shooting answers at me, you're not behaving as a genius. So, should we be doing all these assessments to check their abilities? Assessing kids is so okay, no answer. Okay, so we don't know, right? That's very good. It's a healthy attitude. We don't know. We are told to do that. We don't know really for sure. And will Ania tell us? No, not now. So we have to consider the year. What will the year tell us?
It will tell us their age, approximate age.
Anybody has been to school before? You have been to school, you've been to school, you've been to school. All right, what have we learned so far? What have we learned so far over the last 8 weeks? What would be our starting point? So we've got the year. Once we have a year, we have an age. We have an idea of what they can do, what they can't do, approximately. Some of them can't do anything. Some of them are pretty good writers and readers by now, right? There will be this whole spectrum. So what do we do now? So what does the year tell us? You would probably say selection of books, the kinds of particular titles that children at this time are likely to read. Okay.
Again, that will also depend on their reading ability because some, like, say if they're year 5 or 6, they're about between the ages 10 and 12. But some of them can read books that you would
like
say
Anne
are
of
way
Green Gables, and some of them can't read Pussycat, where have you been? Okay, so, okay, but there's particular interests, right? They have particular interests. I'm not sure that children at the age of 7 and 8 would really want to read The Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. That would probably, after the first 2 words, they would fall asleep. So there will be some sort of general interest. What else?
you get them pick their own book.
That's a pedagogy. I'm trying to think first at this very moment, how are we gonna start that assignment? I know it's another 3 weeks. I'm fully aware. We're not gonna think about it yet, but yes, we will.
You'd probably start by having them read the book.
Yeah. That's still very much assessment and pedagogy, but I want to know what is it that we need to start with? What do we need to, how we start? Not how to start to teach, but how to start planning the assignment. So what you're saying is the first activity could be to get them read a book. Could be, but I don't have you pulled it out of a straw hat. It's no principle underneath it. And what I will be teaching you, that there's no straw hat. The only hat that you have to wear in the classroom is the love hat. Without love for everything you do and for the little creatures that are participating with you in that act of love, nothing will happen. You know, So we have love plus principles. And the principles will tell us what to do. Now, the way I think of principles is a little bit different. I have noticed that in education, it's a very education as a field. I come from language teaching and from humanities. In education, it's a very interesting way how people actually understand the concept of principle. Anything that is brief, anything that's a bullet point list, but you can actually fit in the list of bullet points, it's principles. I found it amazing, just extraordinary. So, but I've seen it, and I'm not talking about teachers doing this, I'm talking about researchers doing this. So there's basically no framework ever linking those principles. It's just, well we value parenthood, we value this, we value this. That's values, that's not principles. I want a list of principles that are connected, but together form a framework, not framework, linked to the assumption about knowledge construction. So knowledge construction, what we think of it, gives us particular understandings of what we can do. And as a result, we will translate them into pedagogic activities. Anything else is speculation. And that's dangerous. It's dangerous even for you because it doesn't guarantee you progress in the field. Because the tighter you are, the more intellectually informed you act, the easier it will be for you to acquire prestige and go high up the ladder in your career, and that's what you want. Because you've got to become an active leader in your profession. Okay, we're still stuck with that assignment. What did we do? We've got the year, we've got abilities, they have different abilities, so we know that. People say to test them, well, you know, America tests students to the point that I think that that's the reason why they're all on pills. We kind of can estimate that none of them will be reading Stephen Hawking's The Great History of Time. What else? We start an assignment, and what do you start? What's in your mind? What is it that we know?
I'll start to think of what is it you want them to learn.
Pretty good. So something like objectives. That's brilliant. It took us a long time to get that. But that's pretty good. Because why the heck are you there? What's your purpose? My purpose is actually to achieve particular objectives. Where do you get them from? Brilliant. From the curriculum. Now I will digress here a little bit. Any student that tells me that they just follow C2C, unacceptable. First of all, it's absolutely intellectually low thing that C2C from Brisbane. I don't know who did it and why they did it. Anybody who says to me we do Steiner, it's not acceptable because nobody does Steiner nowadays. Steiner has been so reinterpreted in so many hundred thousands of ways, but by now Steiner became a recipe. What I teach is actually here in these classes, I'm saying this because we have students from all over the country and overseas. When you do my principles or the way I teach you, you cover Steiner, you cover Amy schools, you cover all the alternative schools. How do I know I'm connected to these communities? Not only, and I'm connected also to groups in Canberra and New South Wales with homeschooling. So, and amazingly, we speak the same language. So, anyone telling me that we do Steiner, I'll challenge them and I'll say, no, you don't, actually. It's just reinterpretation of Steiner in the most weirdest ways possible, what they do nowadays. So we're looking at principles and we're looking at how to actually make our thinking about teaching coherent. And then we can see how it fits into Steiner if someone wants to. So objectives, we have the curriculum. So how do we read the curriculum? Well, Anya, we have a school curriculum. They tell us how to read it. That's very good. But that removes power. You delegate the power to someone else. And we delegate the power all the time. You get sick, you go to the doctor, they give you tablets, you get sicker. Often. You send your children to the kindy, and what happens? Your children change in such drastic ways that some of them healthy, some of them not. And I'm not saying not to do that. What I'm saying is don't delegate everything to other people. Right? Have a bit of the control. If you have a control over your own decisions, you become what? Empowered. You become also resilient. A resilient teacher. A resilient teacher is a teacher that knows why they do particular things and has a compassion for people who come from different ways of thinking. Because then, when you the more knowledge you have, the more you are able to work with people who think differently. Because nobody in school is meaning badly. All you have to do is to engage in a constructive discussion. Right? So it's not like I am like this and you have this defensive stance. Nothing like that. The principal will support you. There's a lot of room. I mean, what I'm going to do in schools is absolutely left field. And everybody's really happy about school signing up. So what I'm saying is a resilient teacher is an informed teacher. An informed teacher is a teacher that has a compassion and understanding and is able to actually, part of the resilience is you are able to negotiate because you have tools for talking to people or for working with people. But you don't have any of these tools if you delegate everything. So empowered, resilient, a person who is able, a teacher who is able to negotiate, because the more they know and learn, the better basis they have from which they view their teaching and can discuss it with others. So we have the curriculum. How do we read the curriculum?
Go to your year level.
Yes. But there are some generic statements, as everybody who knows me by now should know. What are the generic statements in the curriculum? We have those generic skills, or whatever they call them. You know, they call graduate skills, generic skills, higher order skills, right? Those skills you need to read about. They are necessary. And every year these skills come under different, with different phrases and so on. So in order not to worry about it, how they phrase it for this year or for the next year, we will agree that they will be things like critical thinking, creativity, working with teams. What else can be there? Just leave it there. And then we have also the well-being curriculum. And what's typically thought is that the well-being curriculum stands next to the main curriculum. But it's totally wrong. That's because people find it very difficult. They don't have enough experience to actually see that if you actually teach well, you support students' well-being and resilience and self-awareness and all of that. So you actually in your regular mathematics and numeracy and mathematics and literacy and whatever classes, you can actually support all the requirements for that well-being curriculum, provided that your pedagogy is thought through. Okay. So at least, as a student in this unit, you made the decisions, okay, and I'm just for the sake of it, for what, okay, so you basically as a student in this unit, you are to write assignment 2, and you have selected your year group. You don't even have to write for me that there will be students from different languages and whatever, because it's a default situation. Obviously, nobody is the same. So we know that whatever year we pick, students will be different abilities, different interests, different languages they have. We look into the curriculum. We know that there are higher order skills, there are lower order skills, and the higher order skills in the curriculum are represented in many different, in a number of ways. First, as what do they call them? Generic skills or whatever. And then also within the year, you have the higher order skill and then described by different features or attributes. Every skill, so it's like, I don't know how many, 15 or 30 of them, which are described through different features. We've got the curriculum. What do we do now? We do, oh my God. So many outcomes and so little time. See, I'm really glad I didn't have time to prepare for this class the way I wanted to prepare. I had a particular vision, but I didn't do it because I'm absolutely flat out this week, and I didn't want to use stuff from last semester. And I thought, okay, well, we'll just have a look. We'll just run a little tutorial. We'll find out what we know.
Well, that didn't take long, did it?
45 minutes on the thing. Okay, so we're still on slide 1, which is the title slide. So we've got those outcomes. 8. Now, with generic attributes, we have the well-being curriculum, and then we have our outcomes specific to the year. What do we do? I know what these outcomes mean, you say to yourself. And what do they mean? What's the purpose of the outcomes in the curriculum? For planning lessons. Is this what I said last week? Did I say use, okay, if I said that the outcomes are, don't worry about it, come with me, don't worry about last week. If the outcomes were to be used for planning lessons, how would you do that? I know I'm kicking a lot of stuff out of your brains that everybody else has put in there, right? But there might be a reason for it. This is exactly why I decided to take literacy as a unit, for me to do some ordering around. So, and it's actually a core literacy unit for assessment in some sort of accreditation structure. So it's a very important unit. If we were to use learning outcomes to plan our lessons, how would we do that? If you knew the answer, can you give the answer to this one? Shoot, don't worry. Geniuses talk. Give us what you know or what you think. It's not recorded, I'll reply it. I will repeat it on the mic. I mean, you are too far away for your voice to be recorded.
Not the resources first before making this. Not doing the resources.
You create resources. So you've got learning outcomes. So you decide you need to decide what objectives you're gonna use for your learning activities, right? I'd suggest strongly that if you create five lessons, they could be 1 hour or 2 hours. They should be probably 2 hours, because very often literacy units take 2 hours, not 1. And you need to have some time, maybe some objectives. You get them from ACARA or whatever, ACARA plus maybe school curriculum. So you got your objectives, and what do? You create, what did you say?
The resources.
You create resources. What's the role of the resources?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
She said she has objectives, and now she creates resources. What does that mean? What is a resource? I used to take it for granted until I found out. I mean, it's amazing what the field of education can do with positive vocabulary. I found out that scissors are a resource. They're not a resource, they're just tools. They're just things we use in order to work with resources. Anyway, I'm not gonna argue here. What's a resource?
It's like how to assist students.
Okay, so we will at this very moment stick with the concept of digital resources, if only to actually get the methodology of teaching right. That's not a bad idea. And don't think because I'm biased. If you think that's because I'm biased, that's, you didn't actually go through lecture week 8. Okay, so we've got objectives, and we create digital resources which do what? Which teach the objectives? It just, you know, I don't like the word teach, so obviously that's going to be the wrong answer, right? Because we can't teach anyone anything. I mean, when you are in my classes, you think, I'm going to teach students. But when you go on Facebook, you get these proverbs that say, you can't teach anyone anything. Teach me how to do something and I'll be dependent on you. But if you show me blah, 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 therefore, I don't remember the Chinese proverb. But everybody gets very excited about it. But as soon as they are in the literacy classes, they forget what they saw on Facebook. And they want to teach. You can support learning, you can't teach. I have no idea what the word teaching is to me. So what are these digital resources to do? Or any other resources you might actually bring into the learning environment. Okay, so you collect learning resources. Some of them will be digital, some of them may not be digital. You collect them. What's the role of them?
Just like what you said, to support their learning.
And how do they support learning? This is how you do that. This is how you do it. This is how you do it. This is what they do.
I suppose it depends on what sort of resource you've got.
Can depend. We have covered principles and everything. Okay. What's the basic principle that underpins our thinking of learning? Okay, so we're trying now to go to the left side of the whiteboard, and now we're thinking higher order. Before we actually come up with examples of activities that students think, my students think they have to give me, I would like first to, I mean, we've gotten this far, which is pretty good. We're still on title page, just about to move to page 2. But before we move to page 2 of the PowerPoint, what's the basic principle, what learning is? You will notice I don't talk about learning as much because I don't know why we talk about learning. That's another hangout from the 19th century. I talk about knowledge construction. So in your assignments, you can say that we can think of learning as the process involving knowledge construction. Every lecturer will accept it, not just me. Alright, so if we now were to describe the process of knowledge construction in order to give us certain understandings of what to do in learning activities, how would we describe? Students do not learn, they construct knowledge. We could actually even push it further and say they co-construct. Let's come up with a few features that will give us an idea what to do in lesson planning. You see how I'm holding you really tight in a sense? Because very often I get this magnificent copy from some other assignment about this is my pedagogical framework and here it is, we're gonna do matching words and sounds. And I'm going, well, what does the slide 5 on pedagogy have to do with what you're actually gonna do in those learning activities? It doesn't. So then I still have to fail the student. Because overall the planning is not right. So that link between how you talk about your pedagogy and how you execute it has to be coherent. These are not just words, although often they are, but not in my view, okay? So students construct knowledge. That's how we can think of learning, but students construct knowledge. Any characteristics of this process that we can come up with on the basis of what we've done in these 8 weeks? All right, well, I'll just ask you, why do we talk about differentiated learning? Every assignment that you do in this school of education says to you, how will you account for differentiated learning, which means different abilities, different capacities of students, different knowledge, all that stuff. So why are we talking about differentiated learning? So what does that mean in relation to our principle of knowledge construction?
Just one way of teaching something might not.
No, I'm not talking about teaching. I'm talking about, okay, one way of teaching will not
cover everybody.
That is not true. It will.
Everyone learns different.
Okay, so it's individual. The idea that one way of teaching will not fix everyone, it's a myth. One activity will not account for all the abilities or for all the objectives. I agree. Not even for all students, but even for one student. So one activity can't fix it all. But one method of teaching, what does that mean? What is it that I'm doing? I'm giving you a method of teaching. So what are you going to do? Today we do Ania and tomorrow we do behaviorism. And the next day we do Vygotsky, and the next day we do, what will we do then? We're running out of methods. It's an incoherent thinking that is continuously repeated without actually thinking about it, what it means, one way of teaching. What is a one way of teaching? What does that mean? Does this mean principally informed pedagogy will not account for differentiated learning? Obviously it will. There we go. So it's a very, what do I call it? Uninformed way of talking. Sitting still in the 19th century thinking. So students construct knowledge, and the features of this process of construction. That process is individual and personal. Because people are different, they will be relating, or they will be constructing knowledge according to their individual and very personal what? People call them needs. Nobody knows what that means. It's another one big word. Let's call them objectives that derive from their personal and individual histories. So as Kelly was saying, different students will have, because of their different abilities and different interests, they might have different questions that they want to follow up. Or, I don't want to give you all the answers, but something like that. Exactly. So those objectives that students will follow up don't derive from nowhere. They derive from students' individual and personal histories. Individual and personal sounds like very like synonyms, and maybe they are. But individual means belonging to them, and personal means relevant also to their to the ways in which they are, cognitively, emotionally, and so on. So I guess I use individual and personal just to stress how personal they are. Those objectives in relation to which they actually construct knowledge. So that process of knowledge construction, which we use instead of the word learning, has particular features. It's individual. You want a reference? Piaget on Piaget part 1. Piaget on Piaget part 1, and it's in your modules. In your modules you have a link to it, part 1. Piaget talks himself about it. When does knowledge construction actually occur? When do you learn? When you need to. So when you are challenged. You have to perceive challenge. And that's a very important thing. How do teachers make children perceive challenge? You gotta do this. Or today we will be learning this, and I know you don't know it, or most of you. But children don't comprehend it. On the discussion board where we have live lecture, amazingly I found this picture straight after we spoke about this in our class, where there is a drawing of what I was drawing in class, which is what the society wants children to think and do, and this is what children think, much bigger. And when you stand as a teacher and you poke into their little heads, this is as much room as they give you. There's their world here, their dreams, what they want to draw, what they saw yesterday, what they feel. It doesn't matter whether they're 15 or 5. You don't own their head. Doesn't matter how much you beat it. They don't understand. So how are they going to perceive challenge? But to create situations that their histories will respond, and they'll say, oh. So you have to challenge them. Remember how I told you the little anecdote that in the past, the first time when I was teaching undergraduate students, it was very funny. I used to use the word you have to confuse them. And then the students were complaining to the head of school, Ania wants us to confuse children, right? Later on I found out that a better and more politically correct word would be to challenge them. There has to be an element of challenge, otherwise you don't get out of the loop. You run your loops. How do you exit the loop? And how do you make children perceive challenge?
You can make it relevant to them.
Good, make it relevant to them, but how do you do it? You're not God. That's the thing that I have to teach you, because Vygotskian principles that people use in the school teach you you are God. And you might be, but you forget that every child is a girl too in that sense. And therefore you don't own them. You don't know what everyone in your class thinks. How can you give them what's relevant when you, I can't guess what's relevant for you and you and you. There's only 4 of us here today. How do you do it? How do you make children see so they run a particular loop? This is how you do it. We've done it so many times, and so what do you do? And whatever you want us to do, it's irrelevant. We've been really, we can just draw monsters for the rest of our lives and we don't need to read. It's been working. So how do you make it relevant to them? How do you make the challenge relevant to them? By providing them with activities that expand, and this is a key word. This is like chicken tongue in cheek. Expand. I typically call it their frames of reference, but let's call it something that I really want to call it. Let's call it something by which I really want to call it. Expand the assessment criteria. In relation to which they judge what they do and how. So those frames of reference, expansion of their frames of reference, is nothing else but their assessment criteria. We do it all the time. Without assessment criteria that sit in our frontal cortex, quite a lot of them do, we are wild, we misbehave, we don't consider other people, we are unable to look at things from multiple perspectives, we are impulsive. All the qualities that mark people who are not resilient. You can see how when we consider a few good principles of how to create pedagogy, we will not only be accounting for higher order thinking, but also for the well-being curriculum. What we need to do is not tell children what's the lesson for today and what they have to learn, because they don't know. Doesn't make them feel good. It makes them not just bored, but makes them also feel that they are missing things, and you're imposing things on them. And it just doesn't sit in their stomach, because in their stomach they know everything, just like you do. And just like, well, we all have survived until the age we are in, and we wouldn't have if we didn't trust our own knowledge. So you trust your knowledge. Believe me, the 5-year-old does the same. When you say to them, today we're going to do this, some of them are pretty well schooled, so they say that's okay, exciting, but some of them will go, oh, I did another thing. And tomorrow another thing. It's like this, it's like going to the gym and every day there is a higher weight. And how many of you go to the gym? For that very reason, people can't cope with it. Because that's what they, so there. So what we have, learning, when we think of learning, that's what I would love to see, word to word almost, on a particular slide. I don't really care whether you take any text from any other textbook or someone else's assignment. I'm not really interested in it. I'm not interested in textbooks because I think that they are confusing. They are confusing because they want to serve too many people. So, this is Ania Lian's textbook. We can think of knowledge as a process of knowledge construction or co-construction. Why do I talk about co-construction? Because our brain is a social organ. We learn by being in the society. Okay? You put your definition of learning. So it's very simple. If the brain is a social organ, what do we have to do in order for children to learn? Create interactive opportunities. create interactive opportunities. But interactive opportunities doesn't mean us talking to them and then talking to each other only. Because children will get out of you what they need, as we said before, and out of other students what in a particular situation might enable them. But that's not necessarily sufficient. You have no mechanisms as a human being to talk to 25 brains. There's no mind molding happening. There's no Star Trek or whatever it is called happening here. So if learning is social, you need to enhance students' opportunities to dialogize. Because the dialogue will enable them to check the assessment criteria, their own assessment criteria. There's so much talk in pedagogy about assessing students. There's very little talk about teachers assessing their own thinking and actually considering the students have their own assessment criteria in their heads, and we need to expand them. We need to enable them to dialogize, to put these criteria in a dialogue, so that they can see that some of them actually are not serving them. Right? They're not. That's why we learn. Because all of a sudden we see, whoops, when I look at this thing from a different perspective, I see it doesn't look anymore as good as it did before. Right? Have you drawn things? You have. Then you look at the picture somewhere else, and your drawings didn't look the same. Nothing to lose confidence about, but it's a nice sort of test, right? We live in a society, and the society comes to us, the village comes to us and says to us, actually, when you look at this from this and this and this angle, it's not the same. So if we consider particular needs that these different angles enable us to perceive, maybe we can do it differently now. It's called expanding, learning, reconstructing, or actually constructing new. So what we have, just in a quick summary, knowledge construction is learning. Learning is social, therefore we need to produce interactive opportunities. Interactive opportunities cannot be limited just to teacher talking with students or students talking to students. We have to think about it critically. How much can we actually boost that interactivity with what kinds of activities and tools, so that children can actually reassess themselves, get out of the loops, and start actually feeling challenged. It's a perception from another angle that makes them feel, oh, never thought about that. It's a challenge. A challenge doesn't mean to give them a task to perform. It means it has to be, what you said, made relevant to them, which means they have to see that the particular perspective from which they look now is challenging them, is saying to them, the old stuff is no longer working, it's not sufficient. We need to do it differently. And in that way, because you have actually focused on interactivity, supporting interactivity, as opposed to teaching, which I don't know what that means, you all of a sudden not only provide activities to students that are relevant to them, you enable them to perceive the challenge on their own terms. And you cover for individuality. Pretty neat pedagogy, isn't it? And it's all I know. Well, it's all we need to know. Let's have a look at that slide 2. Anyone saw that slide last week. It's on our movie. Lessons are not to be structured around curriculum outcomes. That's a heresy. But that's true. Lessons are structured around projects. Learning resources should be structured around curriculum outcomes, which is what you said. To support students in exploring the meaning of different concepts in different contexts, whatever that means. But, so we use learning outcomes from the curriculum to create opportunities for children to assess how they are thinking, so that in this way we enable them to experience feeling challenged, and feeling challenged, which means on their own terms, in an individual way. So learning resources should be structured around curriculum outcomes to support students in exploring the meaning of different concepts in different contexts. So you can see that we're not organizing our lessons to learning outcomes. As I said last week, our 5 activities or our units of work should cover all learning outcomes for the year, or pretty much most of them. You don't go to curriculum like to Woolworths. You don't pick 2 ingredients to buy for today. And what's important about this pedagogy is that it gives you a reason why your 5 lessons for the assignment 2 should create one single, it's too small for a unit of work, but a coherent structure. So each of them is supporting students in a particular project. Each of them will have to have resources in order for you, if you don't design them, it might be just too much for the assignment too. At least you can describe them, what you would do, what resources you would create. And these resources, you get an idea what is needed because you read the curriculum. Am I really accounted for children to actually perceive or value cultural differences? Am I in this assignment enabled? You see how the assignment, like as learning outcomes in the curriculum, talk about discuss cultural differences. So you teach children to discuss, but they have no tools. They can't discuss. They only solve everything in English. You give them tools, and then when you assess them, and as they produce the project and everything, then you can assess them and you can see whether the project has shown cultural sensitivity. And you can also make them talk about it, but they have to first explore what that thing means, and they can only explore if you give them those resources that enable them to actually do so in relation to a particular activity. Right? So what we're looking for is projects that are big enough that enable children to engage with the world, reflect on the terms on which they act, expand those terms through challenge, progress, and therefore learn. So learning outcomes inform how we structure tools for children to explore them so that they actually become aware of the things that the curriculum is valuing. How else are they going to learn other than through an exploration how things are? You can't explain. So then, once you are prepared and you have particular digital resources or other resources in your hand or with you available that can be used by children to answer their own questions in relation to the task of the project, then you can start thinking about activities. How are you going to actually make it all work together? Right? Much. It's a third step, pretty much. Any questions so far? Anything new here? Anything that you really didn't know? So there are concerns about NAPLAN and so on, and I don't go into it because whatever, but a lot of times, in my view, this is my just slight digression, but a lot of times people feel helpless about NAPLAN because they keep drilling children to particular structures. Children can't perceive challenge, they can't relate to it, it's not talking to them, they can't actually engage in that co-construction because there is no co-construction. Very often there is just an imposition. You must learn this, you must do this, you must do this. It's like treating them like little chimpies. We want a particular behavior out of you, we want a behavior out of you, and because we're aiming so low, we're getting nothing. Because human beings are not low-level beings. I don't even know whether an amoeba is a low-level being. Children have expansive brains. They need to relate things. The brain is not A-B sort of process. Whenever you say one word, if you remember watching Marianne or whatever her name is, Wolf, I've given their YouTube videos to Marianne Wolf, and in one of our PowerPoints for our lesson, there was this 2-minute clip. But basically what she says, you say a word P, and so much of her brain flares up. Lots of connections flare up. There is no P means this, there is no matching. All kinds of connections flare up. And then as the student goes through reasoning and so on, they cut out some things and new things flare up. And then as the sentence moves on, they cut out more things and new things flare up. The brain is rich in connections, uses connections. So the brain, to comprehend anything, you have to comprehend it in more than one way. Otherwise, you do not understand it. Who said it? Minsky. Forgot his name now. He's a cognitive scientist. In order to understand anything, Minsky is M-I-N-S-K-Y, Marvin Minsky. I think the publication was 1981, something about music. Can't remember the title anymore. To understand anything, you have to understand it in more than one way. Otherwise, you haven't understood it at all. At all! Because your brain has rich connections. Remember, there used to be this wonderful curriculum from Queensland that used to be called, forgot it now, but we had deep learning, and how they understood deep learning beats me. But deep learning and connections, deep connections was a very smart, at least, term, because it actually reflects this definition that in order to understand, you've got to make deep connections. If you don't allow for these deep connections and therefore deep learning, children cannot remember the simple behaviors you think you're teaching them for NAPLAN. It's only in your head they are simple. They're not simple. If you removed all the connections and you're teaching them only, if you do this, this will happen, they can't learn it because they can't internalize it. It's not rich enough for them. But if you do the science fiction model, which is engaging children in projects which are supplied with learning resources for children to compare and contrast their understandings on which they act, And when you create activities within the project that enable children to actually use these resources to act in the world, you enable those rich connections. And therefore, the things you really want them to achieve will happen. Especially with little children. They have more neurons than anything still, even though they lost a lot of them since birth. They still have plenty of them left. Okay, we're gonna go for another 10 minutes. Let's have a look at the next slide. I can't remember what it is. Okay. Remember this thing? Again, Ania Lian's model that I have created as a result of my analysis of Phil Cormack's critique of pedagogies nowadays, of the reading class in Australia. These are our explorations, and we've done it 1,000 times in our units. That's children engaged in a project in order to produce it for other people. It's important because we are in the world. The brain is a social organ. If the brain is producing things for the teacher, it's not interesting. Well, you can only please the teacher this many terms. You know, so you do this activity for the teacher in the classroom, and then you sit on Facebook, because once you write something, the whole world responds, and that's cool, isn't it? So you see these kids in the class Facebooking, and you say, oh, I'm going to remove this iPhone from you. So they're going to daydream. Do something in class that enables them to actually connect. Do project and post it on Facebook. I do. I post student evaluations of my units on Facebook. I post my PowerPoints. I post my publications. I post even when I'm doing a presentation, I just have a first slide. I post that too. Anything. Because the brain is a social organ. It needs that feedback. The more likes you get, the merrier. On Facebook, you can create pages of classes. Class 1 page. Available only and visible only to people who you accept. You have a secret group or closed group. And kids from other schools, kids from hospitals, anybody can log in and follow the progress of children. Not just the final thing. They may even give comments. Do they call it 21st century learning? It could be. So the model again. The project has lessons. Every lesson finishes with an achievement. And then what, when, why, and how. So we create resources that respond to the curriculum requirement, but I have broken them down for you. I thought I was original, but I hear John Dewey did that. I'm sure he didn't do it as well as I did. So, when you create your support, the support is not activities. Support are just digital or other resources that you will create to enable children to click and compare and contrast, to get information. For each of the stages of their production of the project or engagement in the project, creating an audiobook for children in the hospital, creating a class book, you know, who's in the class and what can we say about ourselves. I'll come up with examples next week. So the project is big. You create resources for children to compare and contrast. Now come back to the mathematics class. when the teachers were complaining that they couldn't teach ESL students because the ESL students didn't speak English. Had you had that? It could be even done bilingually, but there are particular things that Aboriginal children do have command over. There is vocabulary and there are concepts that they do have in English. But if you had resources that enable children to do precise compare and contrast of things, how things look like, you know, all you have to do is to connect to Khan Academy and get all the resources for preschoolers and primary school people, you know, in mathematics. Order them in a meaningful sequence that supports students in a particular project. Done. And a lot of these resources are not, they use English, they are spoken, but there is a video showing children how things relate. Where did you got it from? How do you connect things and so on? There's also visual representation. We are multisensory beings. So there. Nothing beats, as I keep repeating, children checking how they can actually explore the meaning of different styles of cover books. What do people do? They create a cover for the book. When do they do it? When they create a book, in order to actually create a book, to give it a good look. We can show them maybe texts which don't have a cover, like the poems or other stuff which is online. Right? They can compare. Cover book, yes, here, not always. Why? Well, you can give them activities to compare and contrast. Why? You don't have to tell them why. So what you do, you create a few examples for what people do. They create cover books. So cover books for one culture or one type of book, another type of book, and another type of book. When? Well, you can show them that when it's typically in printed versions. The printed versions you show them also online versions. And when they are online, you show, it's just click and look at examples. And they can talk to each other about it. You don't have to explain, but you produce examples which are contrasting. And that would be for the phase 1 or whatever it is the phase of the audiobook activity. Why? You can show them again how in the printed version a cover book and is an interesting cover book and not interesting. You can show them cover books of stories that they know, and they can actually see that they actually give them meaning, make it more inviting. You don't have to say it. You create a dialogue between them in class and they tell each other. You can also show them texts online, which have no cover book. So what you do, these resources give children opportunities to discuss elements relevant to their phase 1 activity, which is after we've done all this talking and we have played with the software for recording our voices and so on. Now we're trying to actually produce an audiobook. So the phase 1 would be, what's the first thing? There has to be a cover book somehow. I don't know how we're gonna. So how do the audiobooks look like, or how books look like? And you create, according to what, when, why, and how, you create for them little pictures. But they are pictures of examples which provide contrast. And now you can create an activity for them to talk about it. They can talk about it in the Aboriginal languages, but you are still controlling the class after a while, and you can say, so what's the answer? What will we do? What will you do? And you will summarize with them, and they will just get on and do things. So contrasting examples and how you can show them how people do cover books, pictures, how people draw pictures. So how would you do it? Basically by showing how do they, let's for example, you can use for Cinderella a picture of a cover book of a Cinderella book, which is interesting and enticing, and one which is not. So how? By actually playing with color and with other features, but make. So you see how? By playing with different features of image making to make it enticing, interesting. See how much they are learning just from one stupid activity like creating a cover book. Unbelievable. So playing with features. Or you take an interesting book cover and you wipe out interesting bits and you show them, look how it looks without a cover book, look how it looks in different color, look how it looks in the original color as it is, look how it looks without the prints and with the prints or whatever, and they can compare that information in the picture is for a reason, but it takes an intelligent teacher. A teacher has to know first why the cover book looks or illustration looks a particular way. So none of us has, or very few of us have enough training. I don't know, maybe you have. Very few of us have enough training, despite being at the university, in these things. So one methodology is to ask yourselves, how will it look otherwise? How will it look otherwise? How will it look otherwise? So you keep removing things, and then you get the answer. And for 5, 6, 7, 12-year-olds, sufficient. And kids engage in creating or not, or refusing to create cover book, but the book cover. And then once they've done it, here's their achievement. They've done something, but they've done it on an informed base, discussing, exploring, clicking, seeing things. And now they feel, wow, oh my God, we did it. Now, I will have you now think for a moment. In a typical shared reading class, is anything like this happening? A systematic exploration that enables children to make informed choices regarding their own book cover. Doesn't. The teacher fronts up with the book, discusses, this word discuss is just so irritating, discusses with children, half of them don't know what he's talking about, half of them don't even want to listen because they're still thinking of a chocolate they didn't get. And it's covered. The teacher is happy, and we move on. Where's the engagement? Or we did engage. You engaged, you talked to them, sure, but you didn't engage their histories. You didn't allow for knowledge co-construction that, with the help of resources, enabled to actually challenge children's systems of organization in the way that started to make sense to them, made it personal, and therefore they now can make informed decisions that actually talk to their understanding of how the world functions. Do you see how a simple definition of pedagogy links to this? Totally linked. Okay. These are the stages. Now, we've done it last week. I'll just repeat it because we seem to be dragging our heels very slowly today. Remember how you have those 5 E's and I contested them because I think that the words are not too bad. The explanations of those words are another story. But if you actually, because I do research in well-being and resilience, so, and I have a presentation to make on Wednesday. So I'm doing a speed research on resilience. I've been doing this for, I don't know, can't remember, a year, 2 years already, but this is not like a bringing it all together. And it's very interesting what resilience people say, and I didn't know it because I taught it last semester. I didn't know it, but they say reflection, 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 reflection. That's all I do. Engagement, reflection, engagement, reflection, engagement, evaluation, engagement, evaluation, engagement, evaluation, engagement, evaluation. You got your 2 E's forever. They say the children who are not resilient, and that's what we covered here before, are children who don't feel empowered because their frames of reference are not expanded. Therefore, they have no terms to use to discuss things. They don't feel able to actually control that they are heard. They cannot make themselves heard. They don't feel that they have a control of the situation or over their lives. And the way they actually gain control, and apparently I just read my colleague's paper. I read the paper because I love the colleague. I didn't think that her paper would have any relevance to my life, but it does, unfortunately. In every class, when you have about between 25 to 30 children, there will be 8 children in your class, already as from the age 5, that will be marked as low resilient children, but not low resilient children, there will be more of them, but low resilient with the potential to end up 8 of them in the prison by the age of 32. Now I read what my colleague wrote about those children was that once they were a bit older, like, did you read on Facebook just the other day, I read a 13-year-old killed his father. How can the 13-year-old even have the kind of resource? Anyway, and these things do happen, and very often they happen not despite of us, I'd say. I think we get these kids when they're 5 or earlier. We are the village. We are part of the village. Delegating things to parents is just a loser's approach. So what the children were saying, children, they were a bit older, they were 15 or 14, and they were already regularly sexually abused, and they were already trained to be on the street. They even had names. I mean, I have no idea, but someone else told me that the name of an angel is like a name for prostitutes or something, right? I don't know. I'm not a porno characters. I'm not really into it. But what I'm saying is they had names, and they had been raised in the home already for the job. So sorry to say it, but that was happening. The mothers were introducing girls to it, and the fathers and family members were introducing girls and boys to their job. So when the children were coming to the school, and it was amazing they actually were, when they fronted up, what do you think the attitude they had towards school? They hated it. But they didn't hate the school. They hated everything. Now, I don't know whether you have been ever in a situation like this, but I've been in situations like this, and I'm grateful for these experiences when I felt dirty. Not because I was sexually abused, I wasn't, but, you know, my friends had better clothes than I did. I didn't feel good. So when I grew up and had my own money, John, it's out of the wardrobe. But I did feel this way. So when you are in that extreme situation, imagine, I mean, I just thought that my girlfriends had better clothes, that's all. And already made me feel a bit lucky in things, even though I was quite small, 8. I remember looking at the girl thinking, I don't have anything like that. Mine was really good, but I just didn't have a frame of reference to actually look at mine. Mine was mine, therefore was never good enough. Mine was made by my mother, wasn't bought in the shop. So these kids hate pretty much everything that reminds them of not being maybe what other kids are, or maybe not. They feel that something is wrong. So they resist because the new, or the normality that they see is not the normality that legitimizes them. They don't feel empowered in the school situation. They have no terms to renegotiate their emotional state in order then to have a broader stand from which they interact with others, evaluate people's perspectives, and negotiate their own position in that situation. They just don't have, let's call it as simple as possible, they don't have the words for it. Because they are acting from a low level of emotions. Hatred, blame, I don't know about depression, but these are the lowest level of emotions. The anger. So what I'm saying is, this idea of enabling children to reflect. So in order to reflect, you don't just create an activity to reflect. You think of the way how you can break down. I mean, the reason why I produced this what, when, why, and how was for me to think, how could I break down reflection in order to, this is not produced by God, this is Ania Lian. Ania Lian's imagination, but the world is made up of little Ania Lians producing something. And then they become part of the theory of knowledge construction or something. It's just Ania Lian sat down, thought about it, and put it together. But what it is little prompts for you to think how you can actually create resources, enabling students to contrast how these different aspects can be resolved by them in relation to what examples. This expands people's thinking. And what resilience studies are showing expands their perspectivity. They have more perspectives to consider. And with those children who are not resilient, who are being abused and in bad situations, it's exactly what research says, that they don't have. This capacity to consider perspectives. And resilience people would say engagement evaluation, because it's that reflective element that makes a difference. Can you reflect, or are you acting impulsive? Is the first thing, resilience, is the first thing that you hear straight away an offense? Can you stand back? Can you stop? Can you bring in some other perspectives? Can you change the situation? But how can you change when you don't give children opportunities to have a look at different aspects of their project engagement from different angles? And whether they're Aboriginal or not, whether they're Polish or not, whether they speak English or not, these little quick comparisons here, activities, but engage them also in a discussion about how they're going to do it for their audiobook, are wonderful. Enriching. They didn't know it before. They didn't know how to do the illustration, but when you were removing bits and pieces from the book cover, it made it very apparent. You know, I mean, you know yourselves, you're girls, I'm a girl, I know how I look when my hair is dirty, and I know how I look when my hair is clean. So I wash my hair every second day, because I know how I look otherwise. You know, and so on. There are reasons, you know, when you remove something, when you cut, I mean, we have long hair, why? Because we know that how we would look with bald hair. I mean, with no hair, right? So we have hair. We'll spare that. So by removing particular features, we see it actually brings the meaning of the cover book forward, I mean, to the front. Not by discussing it, but actually enabling children to experience. So the purpose behind all these activities, the compare-contrast activities here, is for children to experience the differences. Discussing the experience is good. Discussing alone doesn't give children access to different experiences. They still sit in the past without actually, what we do, we activate different neural networks. So here's your sentence about one way of teaching. If you only activate one, it's not deep teaching. But if you do this teaching, you activated many types of neural networks. And therefore you produce deeper connections and deeper understanding. And the decisions that children make are what I call informed. I don't call it from myself, I borrowed the term from a big sociologist, Pierre Bourdieu, but I'm just saying to you that you don't think that I invented it on my own. A lot of words I use, actually, none of the words I use is accidental, and most of my terms are actually theoretically informed. I just don't give you every reference because it's just not needed. Like even all this model here, I mean, it's not just Ania Lian, obviously. Okay, so what I want you to do, and we need to do it, because if we don't do it, the assignment tool will suffer. What I want us to do is, on the Learn line, we have a forum which is called Assignment to Thinking About It or something like that. Start producing. Start doing what the genius children do. Start producing your statement about your pedagogy. If all of you have the same statement about pedagogy, which you copied from my words from today's lecture, you wouldn't believe how happy I would be. I am not into variation, I am here into a boot camp. This is really good. What happens if you produce some other, you will still have to produce a very tight connection to your planning and may not actually work. So you have to be very careful. Remember how in assignment 1 the concept of literacy was a key? Because how you define literacy affects and how you will actually be talking about reflections and about your experiences as a literate reader, literate person. The same here. This pedagogy has to reflect here. I'll be looking for this link. So not for gymnastics, not for wonderful activities. I'm not interested in wonderful activities. I'm trying to see how the theory links with practice. Okay, so that I would like to see. And if you could start actually thinking about planning 5 lessons, plan 1, plan 2. We can plan 1 already, we already have done it, which is how you would actually engage children in the whole idea of producing, for example, an audiobook or any other project. Because you don't want to front up in the class, although, you know, it's possible, nothing wrong with it. And say to children, today we do an audiobook. And they go there, yeah! They probably would. But you could actually show to them audiobooks and their potential. I saw on Facebook this thing, I said, oh look. You know, it could be one way of engaging their histories in order to actually give them inspiration to do it. But we did it differently. We gave them a software where they were actually talking and things were happening. And in that way, they could see that it's cool, it's nice, and we could now systematize it and produce something for other children. Now, it would be good if you even cheated the children and created not for this assignment, but you may actually say that you would do it, a Facebook or a page online of your school where there are other examples of children doing things. So children see the value, why they should display it. I'm saying cheating because very often schools don't have it. But you can by placing earlier projects on that thing. And schools telling schools it's there and so on, and getting clicks from children or whatever. Apparently you can't have children below the age of 13 on Facebook. Or you can create just using, what did you say, Weebly Weebly or whatever. Anyway, then children can write comments from different schools how much they like it. On Google Sites, you can actually write comments. So you make people authors or collaborators, and people write comments how much they like it and so on. So some interactivity built in would help. So that says children see that there is an environment, that there is a discussion, that there is an audience, and that's motivating. So if you could start thinking about it. Now, I'm a prototypical teacher now. I don't really want you to go back on what you have learned in other units or in schools. I would like you to draw on what we have learned in this unit. So when you think about constructing lessons, and this is the time when you actually get the best feedback from me, because when you actually produce 5 activities and you upload the draft and you say, Ania, what do you think? It's really hard to unravel 5 lessons. Because typically what I would do is this connection between the principles and the practice, you don't have this and this, but you already have invested time into 5 lessons, so it's really hard. This is the best time to get the feedback as you actually go through the process. So I don't want you to actually go on and do the things you've done for other people, or seen done. I want you to remember that. I want you to remember that. I wonder what I have next. Here, remember one activity that I actually published, I just used for publication, which is engaging children in actually producing an interactive map of a school. But then you need to actually introduce them to the concept of the map to begin with, right? And map is not a map. There are many different maps. So what do I have here? All right. I just wanted to see how many pictures I inserted from my publication here. Just see it's only one. But yeah, I want you to think about the possibilities we have discussed here, especially here. How would you use the avatar in those activities that children could use to explore, to do compare and contrast? Remember, the avatar is really good for everyone, and especially for ESL children. Remember Google Translate. Do not forget. There are facilities out there, good or bad, they're better than nothing. And the idea of blaming children for not speaking English is actually not a good way to get out of the situation. It is a problem when you want to teach them. It's not a problem when you want to support learning. I think we've covered quite a lot today. So we still have week 10 and 11 and 12, right? We should cover quite a lot next week. If you make some little drafts of 1 lesson or 2 lessons, so the first lesson should be how you actually get them into, how do you make children, put children on your side that they actually want to do a project, which is that sort of engagement with the world to see how the world functions and what is out there which is cool, and then they could follow up. And then the next thing would be, what would you do with them now then? You convince them to actually start, then you try to systematize thinking, right? So once they have this thing recorded or something, then we want to systematize our thinking. So what do we do? So a few activities there. An activity doesn't mean it's a lesson. It could be series of activities for a lesson. So I want you to think about that, post it for me to review, and then I will feel more confident in actually going through week 10 and 11. Yeah. All right, thank you very much. It was nice to have you here. Okay, thank you.